the person mentioned to me that in talking about listening to a talk, which usually takes place during the first talk, talking about how to listen to a talk, can there be this openness, leaving one's prejudices and ideas aside, not comparing but just listening? You know, you've heard this before. At that time, when talking about this, I made a remark which I cannot repeat verbatim because I don't remember it verbatim. But according to what this person said, and I do remember saying something like this, that sometimes somebody will say to me, "You said such and such." And I said in that talk, "I couldn't possibly have said that." The person who brought it up to me in a meeting said this sounded as though Toni cannot make a mistake, cannot say something that is false or wrong, as though she was infallible. I'm very glad that this was brought up, because obviously this brain that happens to sit in this skull is a conditioned brain, as are all brains. Conditioned, patterned by specific backgrounds and general backgrounds. And of course, I can make mistakes, say wrong things, false things like anybody else. That's why it is also mentioned in a retreat. And right now, if one has the feeling there's something false that isn't so, I don't see it that way, then please bring it up and we'll look at it together, start over again. We may not recall the precise context in which it was said, but we can start over. The language in itself is a conditioned medium. And language and words cannot adequately express something that is inexpressible. The words that are used may be inadequate or even wrong, may be provoking the false associations in the mind. All of this is open to discussion, to clarifying, and maybe to discarding words and finding new and better ones. And to watch whether there's attachment to words or identifying with these words and therefore defensiveness. All of this is open to insight. If it is not, we will not communicate with each other. When a remark was made, I couldn't possibly have said that. It doesn't mean I couldn't have possibly said something false. But the way something is brought back to me at times is not the way I put things. It's not in the repertoire of expressions. It reflects that particular person's repertoire and way of looking at things, which may limit the perception of what is being said. It may not. That needs to be clarified. But if the mind is not open and free to listen, we do distort what we hear. We filter things out or filter things in according to what we want to hear or what we're afraid of hearing. This process goes on in the human mind, not in particular minds here or there, but in the human mind. And it is open to questioning and to looking at, and wondering if there can indeed be a perception which is free of distortion, or an utterance which does not come out of conditioning, even though the language that is being used is a conditioned medium. I clearly recognize the danger, and I think it is being talked about a lot. Some people tell me ad nauseum that there is no infallibility, that mistakes can be made and are being made, but they can be seen and corrected. Maybe not corrected, and then one has to live with the consequences. To project, or even attempt to project, the image of a teacher, I say in quotation marks because I do not see myself as a teacher. Some people don't like to hear that. They say you say it so much, but still you're giving talks, still you're holding meetings. But what happens in a talk or in a meeting? Can one look at something together, move and clarify together, and listen to each other out of depth, not just superficially, but out of depth? Then who's the teacher and who's the learner? And is there really something to teach? If there was, then it would be justifiable to call oneself a teacher, which is the case in mathematics or architecture, engineering or medicine. There is information to be conveyed by one brain which has a larger store of knowledge than the one to whom this knowledge is conveyed. But in this work, it is not a matter of conveying any knowledge, any information. It's the freedom of looking and questioning and communicating together from nowhere, from no fixed position, and to come upon these fixed positions mutually, if they're there, and to shed light on them, so that the ice may crack and break and melt. Leaving the stream to flow again. There are two letters I would like to read. They were written by people who live far away. Very rarely, or one person has never been here. There's a relationship through correspondence. The other person maybe comes here once a year for a retreat. But there's correspondence. This person wrote about a trip that was taken, and it says here, "It occurred to me on this trip, as I listened to my friends," or this person visited friends who are in other spiritual traditions, and these friends all turned out to have very concrete practices with teachers, gurus, either practicing on a very concrete thing or sitting in the presence of the guru regularly. So this person visited these friends, and it occurred to me on this trip, as I listened to my friends and read of the Sufi trip. It was a book that was given to her about somebody who is following the Sufi path, that your approach to understanding self and to living is the most difficult of all. As I drove along, I told myself that I was only fooling myself to think I was strong enough. I, so full of fear, with panic so close to the surface, it seems, to look all this in the eye, to just attend and attend and attend. Why should I suffer so much when I could have the safety, fake though it may be, of a teacher who tells me, as you say in your last article, what to do and what not to do, to evaluate me, lead me along, etc. Unquote. Why are all these thousands of people being actually helped through such methods, while I remain saddled with always attending to my terrible fear alone? You refuse to be a teacher, anyone but a fellow attender along the path of life. I like that. That's nice, a fellow attender. An attender who has understood and can point out the endless traps of mind, and who sees all the systems and teachers as just more obstacles, so to speak. Are all these people, these manifestly good people, such as the Sufi, really so very wrong and understand so wrong and misguided themselves? Can they be? Or is it that they really do understand, but see beings like me in all our weakness and know that in our fear and ignorance, mind must be initially given certain assurances and props and securities, which all get dropped later on? Or do they? I'm just reading. Am I strong enough to skip over these stages of dependency? When I was examining my fear while driving along, I asked myself, who did I think I was kidding? How much better off I would be with a concept of a loving, supporting God, until beyond the intellectual came the experiential knowledge that this loving, supporting God was only my own self, free of traps and mind states and grasping needs. There's nowhere to get, but what about the meanwhile, when self feels like there is somewhere to get, some freedom to attain? The catch is that it may be too late. As I said, the gurus simply have no appeal, but the idea of an inner self, a self that can be listened to, a self that is full of light, that guides if one attends, does appeal. I think. A friend told me a nice story about a teacher who explained why a mantram is a good thing. He told about the elephants in India who, if they walked freely through town, pick up first an orange with their trunk, then a teacup, or whatever is nearby in the passing stalls. So their master puts a bamboo stick in the trunk, and that is enough to keep the trunk from wandering. And so it is, he says, with mind. It picks at this, it drifts over to that, but a mantram, like a bamboo stick, keeps it from wandering all over, so it may be attentively still. Sounds so reasonable. I'm still reading. Is it really possible, Toni, for one so full of fear, so grasping as I, to just attend and to survive? I may not have a choice, But I write this just to share with you my thought process now. I only see that I don't see. Does one really see that one doesn't see? Or is that also an evaluative thinking, feeling bad about it? Wanting this to come, wanting the ignorance to go. It's all open to examination. Just a remark about this elephant with a bamboo stick in the trunk. What happens to the elephant? To the elephant's brain after this bamboo stick has been there, which prevents the trunk from moving? Probably something equivalent to a bamboo stick becomes ingrained in the brain, in the memory of the brain. So the stick is no longer needed because the brain has now been conditioned that the trunk doesn't wander. The stick may cause pain, discomfort. It's a conditioning process. So just because the bamboo stick is not there anymore, does that mean freedom not to grasp, freedom not to want, or conditioning not to grasp for fear of pain, or just a sheer establishment of a new pattern? There's this question that pops up time and time again. Don't I need something until I'm enlightened or until I can see? In the meantime. And then when I do see, then I'll drop this. But the mind becomes conditioned by the method that one uses to keep fear, anger, pain at bay with a mantra or a koan. It's people in the Zen tradition like to quote an ancient Zen teacher who threw a Buddha, a wooden Buddha, in the fire in order to get some heat into the ice-cold temple, as an example of the freedom to discard means, symbols, props. But is one really free? Or is one getting attached to one's methods and environment, which one thinks serves as an interim? But what is an interim? We've lived in an interim for thousands of years. And to really see how attached the mind becomes to its props and aids and methods can only really be seen when these are in the danger of being taken away. And the pain and the fear surfaces. And either it is faced, not knowing whether one will fall apart or not, or one may leave this system and look for another one to find safety. It's not just a matter of facing the fear. but to really understand how and when fear arises. This person here saying, do you think it's really possible for one so full of fear, so grasping, to just attend and survive? What is it that wants to survive? That has to be looked into the face, into the eye, faced, seen. This tremendous attachment, which is taken so for granted, it is not questioned until one begins to question it, to this image of me, the idea, the feeling of me having to survive at all costs. And with that come all the fears and all the needs for props. The props always being for the me and its development. One can just see this mind wanting something. The idea of a self full of light. Why not just face the darkness? Because it's painful. It's very painful. But if one has observed and is observing the way one lives, is one living free from darkness? And there's no attention? Or is one creating one tunnel after another? One dead end after another? Conflict inside, conflict outside. Always running, running, running. Is it possible to catch a hold of one escape a day? To really see that? And because one sees it and understands it, to not walk into that escape, but to remain with what has triggered the impulse to escape. With no promise of any reward or fear of punishment. This work has nothing to do with reward and punishment. This is our conditioning. Let me go on to the next letter. It seems to me that there's one essential problem in the work that I'm trying to do in regard to what you're talking about. It's a problem that I have always had, and quite frankly, I don't see how I will ever be able to solve it. I understand verbally what you are saying. I understand that it is important to look continually and clearly without prejudices and without a motive. It makes sense that the eye is just an ongoing barrage of memories and thoughts that somehow have the ability or the illusion of making it seem that there is a source or an entity behind them. The difficulty is in having the energy to look. I know from my own perception of what this is all about that trying to achieve something that is enlightenment is just creating more of the same difficulties that I'm trying to escape from. I did think it was possible after reading the 3 Pillars of Zen, but any faith I had in that approach has long since left me. Unfortunately, I can't find any energy within myself to look with any degree of persistence. You said in your last letter that it takes honesty, openness, and a genuine interest in direct observations. If one liked to look, then that would create its own energy. I can see that. I'm afraid that I don't have this type of experience with observing, although I don't have an aversion or distaste for doing it. It seems to me that it requires a great deal of energy, and preferably even a passion, if one can use that word. Krishnamurti has said that without this energy or passion, the attempt to understand oneself has very little significance. And from my experience, I would have to agree with him. I have been trying to be aware as best I can in one way or another for 10 years. I know this last statement is obviously from a time-oriented, achieving type of mind. However, Toni, one has to be sensible and practical about this work, since I don't see why it should be immune from this type of a reflection, and admit honestly that this work, as we call it, will never have any significance for me. Please don't tell me that all one has to do is to look, because I already have understood that, or at least I think I've understood, that it is all that is required. Perhaps the problem is that I really don't care about this work, that my mind has somehow been playing with this as another excuse to dream. Perhaps what I am really afraid of is to admit that it is not for me, and to just carry on with my life like most human beings do. Or could it be that to have energy to do something, one must believe that it is possible? That it is possible to do something, one must one must believe that it is possible. Francis Cook wrote a book called How to Raise an Ox, in which it said that faith is an essential prerequisite. Is this what is missing? Toni, it seems to be that something has to pull you. Some inner feeling in your gut has to produce the looking. It can't be done with your head because the energy just isn't deep enough. But can you tell me, what is it that will produce it? Is it the effect of another person? Is it an inner nature which either you have or you don't have? Is it a faith in the possibility? I wonder if you have any suggestions regarding this. With all due respect, Toni, please don't tell me that all that is required is just to look. My head already knows this. This person doesn't want to hear one thing, but wants to hear another thing. A suggestion made as to what will produce this energy. And will that help to get a suggestion of what to do? Or is it even a matter of producing energy? There is a very efficient generator in the human mind to produce energy, and that is all of our striving to get someplace, to be somebody, to acquire things. Be famous, be loved. That produces tremendous energies. And one may have experienced that. If the ego gets a boost, one is told how good one is, or how efficient, or how effective, then there's a gush of energy which feels good and makes one walk lightly. And then the brain concludes that this is a production of energy is necessary in this work of attending. How do I produce it? But it cannot be produced, because everything that tries to produce energy is self-motivated. Yet, if there is a moment, an instant, in which the self is simply not there, no fear to worry about what's going to happen to me, no feeling of division, opposition to other people, no desire to get something for oneself, because that whole pattern is quiet in the brain, it is not active. There's no energy feeding into it. Then energy is there. It's not being produced. It's unproducible. It's there. But it doesn't belong to one, because one isn't there. There's this deeply ingrained feeling of ownership. Ownership of our good traits, ownership of our bad traits. But who is the owner? Other than more ideas and thoughts. One reads, one hears something, one reads a book by Krishnamurti, and a passage like this hits one. Unless there's passionate inquiry, this whole work has very little significance. And what does the mind do with a paragraph or a sentence like this? Immediately looking, where do I fit in here? Comparing oneself, which already drains energy, particularly if one comes out at the lower end of the scale. I have no energy, so I'm not made out for this work, as it cannot have significance for me because Krishnamurti says so. See what is happening. This is all open to observation, and I'm not so sure that this observation takes energy. It just takes attention to look at that, to not take anything for granted that goes on in his mind, in his brain, but to question it, to trace it. If I compare myself and feel judged and devaluated by someone I've made into an authority, the last bit of energy is gone. It's a bummer, as it's called, because the image now is it's like a balloon which has lost its last bit of air. Which doesn't mean that this can't come into awareness. Because awareness is not produced. It's either there or it isn't there. But if it's there, so quickly does one try to determine what it is that one wants to be aware of. Something positive, feeling good, direction. And the conditioned mind is again in action and the awareness is gone. Why can't one be aware of a total lack of energy, total lack of self-esteem? And start with that. Without one hair's breadth of separation from that. In spite of all the feelings that come up, this is bad, it should be different, other people don't have to suffer like I do. To feel these things coming up, but just to listen to it. This whole orchestration of reactions and inputs. With an awareness that is not out for anything other than what's happening right now. And that one doesn't have to be out for, it's there. To start with. And to notice how the faintest desire for this to be different creates conflict, and with that a new drain, a new headache. All of it constantly revolving around this. Me, my life, my fate, my future, my enlightenment or my ignorance. This little shell. Which at times it seems to crack if one is made to feel good about oneself. But it's the same thing, it's also narrow. That energy peters out again. Somebody's going to be better. Because when the mind compares, if it isn't watched. And then the question comes up, I'm sure in the mind now, how do I get this attention? I don't have it. Like this one person saying, oh, I only see that I don't see. But wait a minute. Is there really seeing? That there is confusion, darkness, ignorance, not seeing. And what is the quality of that seeing? Is that simple and completely unadorned with judgment? If there's no judgment of not seeing, then there's a whole turnabout. These moments of precise perception of what is going on are immediately overlaid by wanting things to be otherwise. And at that moment there's no the awareness is gone. Not that it can't be there immediately. To just see this overlay of wanting and dissatisfaction, discontent, just to see that. And watching the mind, where there's immediately a comparison, so-and-so doesn't seem to be always discontented. But just to stay with this discontent without trying to fill it or get rid of it. To let it burn. There's this dialogue. Took place in ancient China. In which a seeker of enlightenment, or of the way as he called it, comes to an old teacher, an old Zen teacher, and asks him, what is the way? And the response is, ordinary mind is the way. We'll stay with that for a moment. Ordinary mind. Is he referring with this expression of ordinary mind to the way we live? In conflict, in strife, in competition, in fear of not surviving, and in constant pursuit of pleasure, entertainment, distraction from our inner agonies. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to the people who are writing this letter. Is he putting out an ideal that one should direct oneself toward? If that happens, there can be no awareness of how this mind functions in compulsion, fear, pursuit, because it's engaged in pursuit. The seeker, the man who came to ask the question, after hearing ordinary mind is the way, asks, how can I get it? Or how can I get onto this way of ordinary mind? The same as what is written and felt today by all of us. How can I get this? Or how, if I have glimpsed it for an instant, how can I preserve it, get it back, maintain it forever? And the answer is, the more you try to get it, the more it gets away from you. Is this just heard? It's been quoted so often. Or can one observe the mind pursuing and the narrowness of the tunnel in which one lives in that pursuit and the impossibility of being aware of the totality of things that surround one and which take place within one, the whole thing. One can't observe that. One can't be with that. One can't be that if there's the pursuit of the way or the success, whether it's business success or enlightenment success. It's the same pursuit, the same state of mind. The tightness of the tendons. It's observable, it's palpable if one sits down and listens in quietness to what's going on inside, outside. Starting with no assumptions, no conclusions, nothing. The seeker in this dialogue comes back and says, but if I don't try, make an effort, pursue it, then how will I know it? And the answer is, the way is beyond or has nothing to do with knowing or not knowing. Knowing is illusion. As attractive as it sounds, this self, this inner self filled with light, is an illusion. It is a concept. It is a fantasy. Does one see that? When there is no blockage of self and me, with all its pursuits and fears of not attaining, then there is no need to strive for light. Because things are clearly what they are. Not what they are for me and my advantage or disadvantage, but what they are in themselves. So, knowledge, he says, is illusion. Knowledge coming from our memories of what we have heard and project wistfully into the future or fearfully. Does one see that? That knowledge about enlightenment, freedom, liberation, the Tao, comes from memory. No difference whether it's the memory of what one has read, what somebody else has experienced, or whether it is a memory of an experience one had oneself, which is clung to as memory. as knowledge, as knowledge. Does one see that? And he says, not knowing is blankness. I wonder what he means by that. What he means by this not knowing. Whether he may mean this state that one can work oneself into by deadening, controlling, repressing thought through a method of concentration. Which dulls the mind, blankens the mind, but it is not understanding. There is another not knowing, which has nothing to do with any method of dulling or controlling thought. It is to realize that knowledge is the past. Everything one knows is memory. But this instant has not yet become knowledge. It is completely fresh, completely untouched by anything that has been in the mind, until the mind takes over and incorporates it as a new bit of memory. If that is seen, understood precisely, carefully, can the mind listen without knowing? The name that comes up when a sound is heard, to see it's just a word, but it's not that sound. The word sound not applying either. And likewise, the person with whom one is speaking is not the person with whom one spoke a week ago or 5 years ago. One has to meet each other freshly, without knowledge, for something to start flowing. Which is, I don't want to say what it is. The man continues. He says, knowledge is illusion. Not knowing is blankness. And then he says, the translation says, when you attain to this way, but this is, permit me to say he can't have said that. Because there's no one to attain that. So let's leave those words out and just say, when there is this way of no doubt, this Tao of no doubt, it is like the vastness of space, unfathomable void. So how could there be right and wrong in it? Right method, wrong method, give me the method. Have I done right up till now? Do you have any suggestions for a better way? Just see the mind operating that way, and can it be quiet in this understanding and not know which way? Then there may be this vastness of no doubt, he says. The way of no doubt Just talked about that last night in a meeting. This thing of no doubt. If a thought comes up, do I really see? Do I really understand? Then what happens in the brain? The thought has come up, or somebody else has asked the question. Do you really see? Do you really understand this? Or is there somebody who is seeing this? What happens in the brain when this question is put? Does it immediately scan for the right answer? And then it may not be the right answer. There may be another answer. Thought is again functioning, and thought functions in doubt. It produces doubt. And if this isn't seen, that thought is functioning again and producing doubt, then one is caught up in the doubt. Doubting oneself, doubting this person and that person, and methods. Which is all right to doubt, but to understand what produces doubt, and that at the moment of doubt, thought is functioning. Brain is scanning for the right answer, which it can't find. It's impossible. Because it always functions in what has been in the past. It doesn't function now. Thought cannot grasp. It hasn't even thought it out yet what is happening now. This is happening. Thought comes later. So he says, if there is this way of no doubt, meaning no thought arising, that immediately divides the thinker from what is being thought or experienced, or the experiencer. Just to see that. Thought can arise, it does arise, but to see its thought and not get caught up in this web. The energy is there when the need is there to understand. I don't know, when one watches the tiniest of children, they're all so inquisitive, they want to find out things. Human beings do want to know, do want to understand, but this, what is apparently a very innate impulse to know, to understand, to find out, gets channeled. Sooner and sooner and sooner, the news magazines now show babies in front of computers to channel this curiosity into productive means. Schools do it. We do that. We do that to ourselves and to our children because of the anxiety of what will he be, what career will he have. Baby has hardly been born. So can this yearning for understanding be rediscovered and freed from its conditioned channels, which sap the energy, soak it up like dry sponges? Because then energy is there, it doesn't have to be aroused by any artificial means, inspiration or the moment one asks, how do I do that? How do I do this? Just watch what is happening in the brain. Maybe this whole question is wrong. Maybe there is absolutely no how. It's just an old habit of thinking, which is very helpful in improving our agriculture, technology, weaponry. But to find out the truth of oneself, I don't know whether there is a how. The moment there is abuse of it and exploitation of it. Competition, competing methods. And lots of money. He says when there is this way of no doubt and no illusion, both of them the function of thinking, including faith. One person asked about both people. We do that. Give me a faith, or do I need a faith that this is possible? Which is again the bamboo stick in the trunk, something to believe in, which then occupies the mind and drains it of the energy to look without any belief. Why is that so difficult? This one person says this is the most difficult thing. I think we don't watch our escapes because we like them. We're used to them. Give us a sense of safety. And out of the sense of safety of our escapes, we say, why don't I have the energy to do this work? See, we want so many things, but it's all to be satisfied, to get something out of it for ourselves. And that never works completely. It may work for a while and then it doesn't work any longer. Why is it so difficult to watch? Not it shouldn't be difficult, but to put the question and then observe if one needs to find out. If one doesn't need to find out, as this one person says, one just goes along. But I question whether it's even possible to do that, because once questions have been asked, they don't leave one alone. So to finish this, what this man said, when there is this way of no doubt, no illusion, it is like vast space, unfathomable, he says, unfathomable void, meaning knowledge can't touch it. The moment there is a desire to know it, it's finished. Then there is the old conditioning in operation. But when there's no not knowing and not wanting to know, then he says, how can there be right and wrong? all these opposites in which we think, good and bad. They and us. It's just our limited way of thinking, which has such incredibly disastrous consequences throughout the world. Is it possible every once in a while, during the day or week or whenever, there's really a yearning, I don't know what word to use, to just sit down with whatever is there and not know it, to listen. Not with attention, just listen. With nothing. Without wanting to get any place. We will end here for today.